The Colonial Pipeline, which supplies gas from Texas to New Jersey, was paralyzed by a ransomware attack. This week, that led to panic buying and empty gas pumps. Gas is now flowing through the pipeline again, but only after the company paid nearly $5 million to hackers, according to reports. This raises serious questions about American infrastructure and cyber attacks. Here's President Biden on Thursday.
This event is providing an urgent reminder of why we need to harden our infrastructure and make it more resilient against all threats, natural and man-made. It's clearer than ever that doing nothing is not an option.
Biden met with a number of Republicans to try to get a deal. Kasie, I want to come to you. I want to start and ask, is this a wake-up call? Could this be a wake-up call, this hack to President Biden and lawmakers on infrastructure? Could it make reaching a deal more likely?
Well, Yamiche, I think that it perhaps makes it more likely that any deal would contain things that are focused on this particular problem. I also think this is something that is going to be addressed likely in a bipartisan fashion, potentially in committees that reach into the national security realm and not just those that you would typically think of in terms of a bipartisan infrastructure package that's focused on domestic needs. I think Susan's right to point out that the administration, I think, has been very focused on this behind the scenes, very concerned about it, but in public has been working to present a vision of calm, of steadfastness, of trying to take on the problem, of trying not to alarm people. Clearly, the panic buying shows that some people were alarmed anyway, but that was their approach. But on the Hill, when I talk to people who are decision makers, especially members of the intelligence committees on both sides of the Hill, they're very worried about this. And while it seems that this was a private sector attack, there are obviously opportunities for state-based actors to take advantage of some of those opportunities. So I would expect that this is going to be something that's going to be addressed in a multitude of ways and that actually will probably escape a lot of the partisan fighting that we see typically on these more political issues, simply because I do think there's a sense of urgency across the board in Congress.
Well, Manu, I want to come to you. Casey's saying there's a sense of urgency. What are you hearing about whether or not a sort of deal on infrastructure is possible? And are there ways that maybe Democrats go it alone on other bills?
Yeah, I think that there's a possibility that they could get a bipartisan deal. And I'm one who's usually incredibly pessimistic about getting any bipartisan deal. Having covered the Hill as long as I have, you often see those bipartisan efforts fail. And this one very well could fail as well. But at the moment, both sides are signaling that there's serious interest in getting a deal. The White House, the Democrats essentially realize that in the Senate, they do not have all their ducks in a row. They cannot get a big, massive package that the liberals want through the Senate because simply they do not have the unity to do that. And it's not just Joe Manchin, the West Virginia Democrat, who has concerns, but other Democrats do as well, to go as broad and as sweeping. So they need to find a bipartisan consensus. So there is serious discussion about something in the range of $800 billion. There are still so many questions they do have to sort through, including exactly how to pay for it. Republicans drawing a red line about raising taxes through the 2017 tax law, such as the corporate tax or capital gains tax. And Democrats have to agree to whether or not they could go for the types of user fees that the Republicans have proposed. They are not anywhere near yet. That has sunk infrastructure packages in the past. But what they're talking about doing, Democrats are moving, say, $800 billion or so along bipartisan lines, and then try to move the rest of the package along partisan lines through the budget process that allows them to escape a filibuster in the Senate. But so many details to sort through, and they got to get their ducks in a row, and they're just not there yet.
That's one way to put it. There are ducks in the row. There's, of course, a lot to sort through. Eugene, talk to me a little bit about how President Biden is approaching this. There was an interesting story about how he has a folksy outer kind of demeanor, but also has a short temper, is really focused.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, he's been doing this for a very long time, 36 years in the Senate, 8 years kind of doing the congressional outreach as vice president. So he knows how to do this. He knows how to twist arms. And I think he needs to say that I got a bipartisan bipartisan deal done. They know that. And so I think they're willing to concede on some of the things that other Democrats may not want them to. And that's something that we're going to continue to see, because if you look at the things that he's talked about that are hard infrastructure, that's kind of along the lines of the billions of dollars that Republicans are willing to spend. And so they're not as far away, I think, as it may seem at this point.
Susan, how is President Biden's decades of experience in government really impacting how he's approaching this?
Well, he has personal relationships with a whole lot of people. That's generally helpful. He also has kind of a mature attitude about it, too. So he's willing to ignore people who say you weren't legitimately elected if you can still strike a deal with them. I agree with Manu. The safe bet is always that a compromise will not happen. But it's been interesting to see people using muscles that no one's used for a couple years. You see it on criminal justice reform, and you see it on dealing with military sexual assaults, and you see it on this infrastructure bill. It's interesting that they are still talking. It is still conceivable that they would reach an $800 billion bill. Who would have bet on that 6 months ago?
And before we go, the United Nations warned of a possible full-scale war. This week, violence between Israel and the Palestinian militia group Hamas hit a new high. Susan, I want to come to you. When it comes to this conflict, what do you think is motivating the Biden administration's strategy here? And has it shifted from the way that past presidents have handled this issue?
Yes, I mean, I think very different from President Trump, who was invested in the Middle East, thought he could bring peace to the Middle East. Biden does not suffer from that illusion. He would describe it, I think, if he was being candid, an illusion, not something that's realistic. On the other hand, the U.S. has a role in the Middle East that is undeniable. The United States is being sucked into this terrible conflict that we see between the Israelis and the Palestinians, not the fight that Biden would like to be having.
Kasie, in the last 30 seconds here, how is these conflicts being seen on Capitol Hill?
Well, I think that there is a lot of nervousness, Yamiche, particularly because this conflict seems to have come inside Israeli borders and involved Arab Israeli citizens. And that's some of the violence that you're seeing in the streets of Israel. And that is something that I think has a lot of people on edge, especially those who've always in Congress been staunch supporters of Israel, just because that is something that has the potential to be particularly incendiary, Yamiche.
Eugene, again, only got 10 seconds here, but I want to just bring you in on this Middle East issue and how Biden's handling it.
Yeah, I think the way that he's looking at it is exactly what Susan was saying. He really would rather focus on China, rather focus on Russia. And he's also in a position that no other president in a very long time has been in, that members of his party are willing to speak out in favor of Palestinians in a way that I don't think they've seen. So that puts him in a more sticky position than other presidents when dealing with this issue.